Hello and welcome to Teenagers Untangled, the award-winning audio hub for parents going through the teenage years. I'm Rachel Richards, parenting coach, mother of 2 teenagers and 2 bonus daughters.
I'm Susie Asley, mindfulness coach, mindful therapist, mother of 3 teenagers, 2 of them are twins.
Susie, have you heard the term bamboccioni?
No.
It's the Italian word for big babies or men who still live in the family home a long time past the average age that society deems normal. Mm-hmm. We heard about them recently. There was a 74-year-old woman from Italy who went to court to evict her 42 and 40-year-old sons from home, and apparently they both have jobs, but they do nothing to contribute financially to household expenses or help with the chores.
Wow, there is so much in that story, isn't there?
So much in that
Went
story.
To court for her own kids to evict them. Wow.
And the judge agreed that there was a maintenance obligation, that the mother had which is a very real thing in Italy. It's a really interesting concept that they have there.
Wow.
You're expected to care for your offspring as long as they need it, but the judge found that it no longer appears justifiable given the duo are over 40.
I mean, all I'm thinking of is what kind of communication does that family have? And who would want to live in that house afterwards anyway?
The mind boggles, doesn't it? Yes. So that's one extreme.
Yes.
And I think that's one of those stories that makes parents panic and they think, I don't want that. But that's extreme.
Yes.
Anyway.
I would say so in very many ways.
Yeah. So one of our listeners before this came out, had asked us to talk about charging your teen rent. I don't know what age her teen is, but, what should we be doing? Should we be charging rent? Why, when, all that sort of stuff. So I thought that's a really, really good topic. Even if you've got younger teens, it's worth sort of looking ahead and thinking, how does this work? Anyway, let's have a quick look at nuggets before we move on. Susie, do you have anything for us?
Yeah, I do. Mine's a bit, I don't know. I don't want it to sound mushy and smug, but it's just...
We love mushy and smug.
Okay, good then.
The world's not got enough nice stories.
Well, my eldest is at university. He's just started this term and came back for a few days this week. And it was just so lovely. I dropped him back last night and he's not very far away, so it was really easy. And it was just a really lovely few days, and it made... loads of things landed, from parenting them on my own for years. They were just all really respect and love each other, and we just had such a lovely few days. And they really miss each other and muck about, and just really beautiful. And they said he has said some really lovely things to all of us. Actually, just really appreciates us, and it just felt really lovely.
And that's what we're all hoping for.
Yeah, and also
we're all trying to grow.
Yeah, and also on, from a mindfulness perspective as well, it's a moment. I'm not going to try and cling on to that one either. It's a moment, and tomorrow something might happen where it's different. But in that moment, I can tell you I savoured it.
And that's important. Like you said, it's important to stop for those moments and just really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to the issue of whether our older teens should pay rent. I did a straw poll on Instagram and everyone said yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But only if they're not in education.
Okay, yes.
Okay. Which is interesting because, of course, we didn't talk about, what if they're doing an apprenticeship? Because that's becoming more common nowadays. Yeah. So you're in apprenticeship, you're getting paid money, you're learning, but you're working. So there are things like that.
You don't normally get paid masses for that,
You don't get paid masses, no. So, I mean, it's just, it's just an interesting addendum. Yeah. And I have got the impression that in America, a lot of parents think that when a kid turns 18, they should start paying rent.
Okay.
I've seen a lot about that, which is interesting because with the science, more recent science has moved on, and we know that 18 is not the watershed for being an adult, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we know that up to 25, they're still, all our lives we're developing, but there's particularly that big growth period.
Brain development,
Yes. And I thought it would be interesting to delve into how did we get here, this concept of teenagers and them being in the home, and then when do they become adults? And I'm curious, do you know when the term teenager emerged?
I don't.
Mm-hmm. It only became common in the late 40s and 50s. And that was when UK schooling was made compulsory to the age of 15. And in the US, high school graduation rates grew from less than 10% at the start of the century to around 60% by the mid-1950s. And at the same time, the sense that young people had a duty to serve their parents weakened. And there was a writer for New York, for the New Yorker, who noted in 1958, to some extent, the teenage market, and in fact, the very notion of the teenager, has been created by businessmen who exploit it. So it was a new market. It was a way that, you sort of, these people who were emerging as another category that you could sell to.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
And what is interesting in particular is that things have changed more recently, which is marked by, for example, when we did the teenage delinquency podcast, and I discovered that in the last 20 years, there's been a significant shift in the markers for kids turning into adults or sort of pushing the boundaries. Yeah. So 17 and 18-year-olds in US and Europe are now much more less likely to have tried alcohol, had sex, learnt to drive a license, got pregnant than teens 20 years ago. Things have really shifted.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And there was a very interesting book by Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott at the London Business School who've proposed, well, it's called The 100-Year Life, because this is another thing that's happening, which is we're living longer. And that's shifting the demographic to much older population, which is one thing. But also they argue that the 3-stage life, so you go to school, you work, and then you retire, it's irrelevant.
That's so
it's not going to continue because of this length of our lives. And actually, they're saying it's ludicrous that we think that late teens and kids in their 20s should have some kind of grasp of what they're going to do for all of that time.
Yeah, they're going to change massively.
Yes.
Totally different now.
Yes. And they say we should sort of be exploring and which is actually what my teen bonus daughter is doing. She's sort of got to 25, actually she's 26, and she has a really good job. She's given it up because she said, that feels like the job I should be doing when I'm 40.
Oh, right.
And she's going travelling.
Amazing.
And she's got an idea for a business that she'd like to try out. And I said, how great, because you've saved some money.
Yeah,
right.
But they're all going to be having different. I think they term it, don't they? They're going to have different careers, not just different jobs, but they're going to have different careers. So there's not the same structure around it at all anymore.
Yes, and I have a question for you. What's the word for someone who is not a child, but they're not yet a teenager?
As a tween.
Yes. What's the word for someone who's 18, but they're not yet a working adult? We don't have one.
Layabout.
They might be working really hard at university.
I'm kidding.
No, but we don't have. So in ancient Greece, a young Athenian was called an ephebe, and that was an 18 to 19-year-old training to be a full citizen. And there was a German word called a backfish, which was literally a baked fish. And this was popped up in coming-of-age novels. And it was an adventurous girl who had an adult's independence paired with a child's reckless approach to risk.
Wow, where did that come from? Baked fish?
Yeah, so it's great, isn't it? It's classic German. But we don't have, isn't that interesting? And I thought actually it would be maybe because we're not really... They're sort of in no man's land.
I think you should invent one, Rachel.
I think I should.
I think you should.
I think.
What would it be?
I mentioned a couple, and my daughters just rolled their eyes and said, "Mum, it's just ridiculous." So I won't even bring them out. But yeah, we'll have to. Look, I tell you what. Why don't our listeners, if any of you can come up with a good word for it, we need a word for this because it's Anyway.
Yes. No, seriously.
So I guess the question is, when do we start treating them like, where does this adult thing happen and how does rent? This is why I'm interested in this, because the rent comes
it's not
into
about
it.
the money, is it? It's about responsibility and your sort of attitude to life in general.
There are some other transformations that have been happening. Cost of living. In America, the nuclear family has been undergoing a quiet transformation. So according to Pew Research, the number of kids living in multi-generational households is as high now as it was around 1950.
Wow.
And that's a historical peak of multi-generational co-residence. And it's more than double what they were in 1980s, which was the historic low of around 5% of kids living in these households. Yeah.
Really interesting.
So
with all the pluses and minuses that bring.
Yes, exactly. And wealth imbalances between older generations and today's young people have only strengthened that trend. And in the UK, around 3.5 million single young adults now live with their parents, which is a third more than a decade ago.
That's really high.
We've got a boomerang phenomenon here. Young adults go out and then they're back again because they can't afford their own property. Right? It's actually, and part of it's been the pandemic impact. Lending Tree showed that 32% of millennials and Gen Zers moved back with their parents during the pandemic. a lot of them haven't moved out.
No.
And it's house prices soared.
Yes, massively.
And wages didn't match up.
They just can't afford it.
Yeah. So, paying off student debt, trying to get a deposit, all this stuff. So what's happened is mentally we're still back where we were 20 years ago, but I think things have really shifted and this needs to be considered if we're talking about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also in Asia.
Well, you've done so much research, Rachel.
I just,
It's amazing.
Can't help myself. And the problem is I curse myself because I spend ages trying to whittle it down because
no, it's good.
hopefully it's interesting. I find it interesting. In Asia, most Asian societies feel that moving out is something that's disrespectful to your parents. I saw one anecdote where this guy who was 28 was saying, I want to move out, but it took him months before he was prepared to broach it with his parents because he felt like they would be very upset by it.
It's very different culturally.
Very different.
So interesting.
And in Singapore, an estimated 97% of unmarried individuals up to 34 lived with their parents in 2013. In a recent survey in 2021, 7 in 10 respondents in that age group were considering moving out in Singapore. So, wow.
Yeah, that's a big shift, isn't it?
It's a big shift.
Interesting to know
and
why.
this is in spite of the fact that in Hong Kong and Taiwan, they have some of the highest rent prices in the world. Massive, completely different, like 2 times more than homes in New York and London, which are very expensive.
Yeah. But a desire to move out is definitely there.
Yeah. And some of the anecdotes where living with your parents can feel like everything is on autopilot. You're not fully taking control of your space or your diet, and you just eat what's on the table, right? And actually, the LGBT community is a big issue there because there's a lot of prejudice against them. So people living at home can't live that life.
Yeah,
a lot of them find it very oppressive.
Awful, yeah.
So that's one of the things.
Yeah.
Just a little one. When I was at university, my friend had an Italian boyfriend who was older than her. And I remember him wanting to buy her a bracelet. And he had to have a family meeting to ask the family if it was all right for him to buy this bracelet for her. Because the way their family finances were set up was that even though he was working, all his money went into the family account.
Oh, wow. Gosh. It's a very different way of being, isn't
so
it?
It's really interesting. So the reason I'm just trying to put it into context because we've got listeners all over the world and this is going to mean different things to different people. You can't just say this is what you should do, right?
No, and money's never just about money.
No. So anyway, we're living in an era where more people are staying at home, they're staying at home longer, all that stuff. So let's go back to this. Should we charge rent? Not all experts agree.
No, it just depends on so much, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So much. I mean, I'm quite surprised that in your straw poll that everyone said yes. I'm quite surprised by that. I would be a no.
Interesting.
But I would make it, because it's about responsibility, I think, isn't it? And it massively depends on the family finances. So
massively.
If you have
critical.
Family finances where you need that extra income, then yes, of course they should contribute, and there'd be a discussion about that, and that would only be fair. But if they're going in and out a bit, and it's more of a, I think sometimes it can feel a little bit like a gesture, that you want them to take responsibility. And if they're still teenagers, that means 18 or 19, which is still pretty young. In the 20s, I would have a different opinion, I think. But as we're doing teenagers, I think if it's about responsibility, I think you can take responsibility and show responsibility in many ways that aren't necessarily contributing with finances. You can do, more chores, you can help out, you can do things, and that might cost you money to do some of the things. You might say, can you go shopping? And of course that's contributing to the family finances. That's a bad example. But you can do lots of things that you're taking responsibility for being in the family at a different stage of your life. I think I would start with that.
Yes. So the question is so it's not all about money.
No.
It's about
taking responsibility and showing the distinction that now you're not going to school anymore, you're not in education, you are working, and with that, and you want to stay at home, with that comes a more adult or a more mature responsibility status.
I mean, some experts say it's actually detrimental to the teenage psyche. We tell our children that they're loved and that they're part of a family no matter what. You had a home and a family, but now you're 18 or whatever, you have to contribute to the household. I don't agree with that, though. No. I think that I think it's more that you're part of a household and it's kind of contributing in the way that you can. I don't see that as being damaging to the teenage psyche if you actually say, well, you're making some money, go buy some loo roll. But
No, that's why it's so
Yes.
context-based.
Yes, it's very
individual-based.
Absolutely.
I think what I would do, actually, thinking about it, is I would encourage my teen to save and say, look, I'm not going to charge you rent, but why don't you put a little bit aside that maybe I could ask for, but I'm not going to. Put it aside, or give it to me if you want me to look after it. And then you can put that towards whatever you want to, whatever your next stage is. I think that would be a more sensible way of doing it.
That's absolutely one of the most interesting things that I saw people talking about, where they said that they're very upset about the society idea that if you're living at home in your parents' basement or whatever, then you're just a loser, because actually it could be economically the most sensible thing to do, because you can set aside money for your studies or paying off your debts or, getting yourself a car or all these things. And it could, that guy living at home at 25 or 28, saving for his future, could set himself up in a way that's so much more sensible. It could be the smartest thing he's doing, not being a flunkier.
And with the prices as they are now, that makes total sense.
It makes total sense. And here's a fun one. Careful what you start. So let's say you say, right, I'm going to charge you rent. What will you do if they don't pay it? Right? Because you're going to need some consequences. So, are you going to take their TV away? Are you going to, how are you going to manage this? So you need to have a really,
oh God.
And also, if you say, I'm going to take money from you for living in the house, you now have elevated their status because they're now contributing to the house. So they may well expect things in return, like fewer rules, be able to go and do things that you may not like. Again, what you're doing is you're creating a different relationship, which isn't about trust and love, and it's a much more sort of structured relationship. And it doesn't mean there's no trust or love in it, but it just means that you've now actually codified something. You need to have
a conversation around
it, right? It's really interesting.
They might start drawing on their walls or something.
Exactly. I've got a great story. So this 18-year-old young man posted on the internet that he was upset when his stepdad initially told him he needed to start paying a fair rent at 18. And he told him ahead of time, he said, you're going to turn 18. I expect you to start paying rent. Well, it turns out that the stepdad didn't realise the house had actually been given to the boy in his dad's will, because his mum and dad weren't married when his dad died when he was 6. And that meant that when he realised that, he turned the tables on his stepdad and said, right, when I turn 18, you can start paying me rent.
Oops.
And the stepdad has accused him of being unfair and heartless, claiming that he suggested the teen should do it so he can prepare himself for adult life. And the teen's retort is, well, if I need to pay rent to learn to be an adult, then what does that make him, living here rent-free?
Oh, dear. I think their communication needs working on.
So funny, isn't it? So funny. Anyway, so my point is, think about it before you...
Yeah, absolutely.
So before you make a decision about this, review your reasons. What do you expect to gain from it? What are you hoping your child will gain or lose from it?
And maybe why are they living at home? Like, start there. Why are you living at home? Is it to save money? Well, then taking all their income is a bit of a strange thing to do, isn't it? I mean, I'm not going to judge anyone for doing that, but why are they living at home? That would be my most obvious starting point.
Absolutely. And so, for example, things that might make you trigger you to think, okay, I'm going to start charging rent. If you've got a 16-year-old who drops out of high school and says, and he's got a job, or a 17-year-old who quits school and says he'd rather, do something else. Any of these things, or 18-year-old who wants to live at home after he's graduated from high school, isn't actually looking for a job or anything. You can, it would be a nudge, a way of saying, okay, if you're going to not be studying and growing, then, that's what the corollary is. This is how this works.
That's one option you could use, isn't it? There's lots of other things you could do to have that conversation.
But I'm just saying that might trigger you to start thinking about it, not necessarily, right, they're 18, they've got to start paying rent now.
Because you want them to take responsibility for their lives, but maybe there's lots of ways of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Issues with not charging rent that I saw were they'll miss out on valuable budgeting skills, life skills. Now that could be not just rent. That could be, okay, you have to buy the XYZ, and lack of emotional growth. They may have to face their fears. They're not stepping outside their emotional zone if they're not having to face up to some of the things that are demanded of a fully grown adult.
Yeah. That's a really valid point, I think.
Yeah, and that would then give them increased dependency on you, and they may fear living on their own and doubt their ability.
Yes, because a lot of that kind of stuff is uncomfortable, and you have to do it a couple of times, don't you? And then it's just that, it's fine.
Oh, it's fine.
But
yes,
the getting over the hurdle can be tricky.
Yes, and you could be stripping them of their ambition. One of my bonus daughters, I was talking to her about it, and she said, out of all my friends, and she has a lot of them, she said, the ones who hit no bumps in the road, who had parents who really looked after them, were really loving and kind, but they never really had to fight for anything. She said they're the ones who are most unhappy because they don't really understand how incredibly lucky they are, and they just haven't grown in the way that my other friends who've had to really battle have. There's
so much truth in that. It's battling with difficulty. It gives you resilience, doesn't it? Or failing, doing badly in something is really good to learn from.
Absolutely. Yeah. So how much? Let's say we're going to do this. So you'll have to, I don't know, look at the local rental advertisements and see what percentage of that you think would be reasonable. If you're actually going to agree it with them, why not take them with you and say, what do you think? You don't necessarily have to take the money yourself. Like you said, you can put it into a fund. You could actually help them invest it.
And how much do they earn? I mean, that's absolutely critical, isn't it? Like what kind of a job? If they've just got like a little job, then that absolutely has to play a role in how much.
Yes, and you don't want to, I talked about this with my daughters, and they were looking at me aghast, like, you're going to make us pay rent? And I said, and they were thinking that if they got a sort of part-time job, then I'd be taking the money from them. And I said, good God, no, I'm not in the business of trying to penalise you for going out and working. No, exactly. It's the opposite. I'd like you to do that. So that's, and I think, again, it comes back to how much I think for some parents it's either you really need the money, and if you need the money, this is absolutely understandable, and but what you don't want to do is hand over the fear to a teenager who's not ready for it yet, because there's a big gulf there. I remember being very fearful because we had no money, and I felt all the time like I just wouldn't sleep at night because I'd be so worried about just having money to do anything. Yeah,
or that they then can't move out because they have to pay mum and dad's bills, and what will they do if they move out?
Absolutely. So there's good parenting is about trying to protect them from some of that, because the harsh reality, often they're not really ready for it, and you just end up with them with very high levels of cortisol, and it stayed with me my whole 20s. I was always fearful, very, very scared of not having money, which made me work really hard, but not in a good way.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
So the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Loughborough University, which I mentioned before, actually calculated that young adults should be paying at least £100 a month to live at home with their parents, which equates to about 120 in the US, around that. And they said that food was the biggest additional cost. So, maybe contributing to that. Yeah. This is in their 20s.
Yeah.
A couple in Texas shared on TikTok that they'd been charging their teenage daughter monthly rent because she'd graduated high school and decided not to go to college. They said it's $200 for rent, and that they were charging her to prepare her for adulthood. The teenager stayed with her parents for several months before moving out. The thing is, once your pitch is so high, they're just going to move. And maybe that's what you want. I don't know. But it doesn't make it very nice, does it?
No, it's a funny way of doing it.
Whether you do or you don't, it's shifting that emotional relationship with your teenagers into ones where they're now starting to be much more responsible. Yeah. And we have to kind of adapt.
Totally. I totally agree with that. And I think a lot of us get that wrong. I think maybe in, I don't know, maybe the previous generations where, we recognise it ourselves, don't we? And see it in friends if we don't have parents anymore ourselves. You go back home and you regress to being, 15. Yes. And you get treated like it because nobody's really moved on. Yeah. And I think you have to be really conscious about it. And I'm practicing that at the moment, actually, because my son, he's only just left, but he's 18 and this was the first visit back. And I was really conscious about, how is this going to be? He was delighted to be home. It was really fun. It was really lovely. There were no problems. But at the back of my mind the whole time, I was thinking, it's shifted. There's a shift now, and I have to be really conscious of that, so that he feels that he can be himself at home. But because being himself has changed. He's not a schoolboy anymore. He's not, even after his A-levels, he was at home, but he's not a schoolboy. Normally, his every day, he decides exactly what he does when he wants to do all of it. And he's at university, so there's structure in it. But I remember being like that. So I don't want him coming home and then having to change or have to, be put back into a box somehow or not feel that he can be.
So what do you think we can do to be, you said you're conscious of that, which is amazing. Yeah. Because I've seen, particularly with men power struggles, where I'm making the money. This is my house, but this is also sometimes mothers, and these are my rules. And how do we make that transition?
Treat him as an adult, like. You're having dinner with us tonight. Just little tiny things. He's only here for a few days. It's really new, and he's not working in a big job somewhere and coming home. But it would be the same thing I would do. It's the little things. It's treating with respect. I am no longer. I have a different role with him now. I'm not sure I'm explaining it very clearly, but there's a shift where it's a respect. It's a respect thing.
Yes.
It's inviting. Do you want to do this? No, okay, and being completely cool about it if you don't.
It's an interesting one because I had one of my bonus daughters living with us for a while when she'd graduated, and she was looking for work, and I loved seeing her. I really loved seeing her. I panicked a bit when she'd first was kind of lying around for 2 weeks in her bikini. Yeah. Because and I was saying to her, right, you've got to start looking for work. You've got to look for jobs. And so I was on her back. But what was really interesting was when she'd started work, and she's amazing. She's really she's just brilliant. But when she started work, she was still living here, and she was going out, working, and coming home super late. So, but we never knew, we weren't communicating well. So I didn't know, are we supposed to cook for her? So I'd make some food just in case. And then she'd turn up at just before bedtime, say hi, and then go to bed, and then get up the next day. And I found that quite challenging because she was just treating it like a doss house. And that was my fault, I think, when I look back, because I knew I wasn't doing it right, but I wasn't sure how I was doing it wrong. And on reflection, I think what I needed to do was have a conversation. Yeah, have a conversation about what the expectations are, and how do we do this together so it's lovely, rather than torturous. Yeah,
and just be really upfront about it. Like, I'm cooking dinner tonight. Are you here? You don't know yet. Fine, just send me a text when you know. I'll make enough, and just be. I'm just try and be easy with it. It doesn't matter.
But it can feel very challenging when you're in a house and someone is coming and going whenever they're not contributing in any way. Because I never would have asked for anything. But when they're not contributing, but they're just kind of turning up at random times and then leaving again, and you just feel a bit used. Yeah. So I can see that. I can see how the charging for something might make them feel like there's more of a kind of connection.
Yes, filling a hole.
I guess. I don't know. But I think that's one of the challenges that we can experience. And it's about being really healthy communication, which is very difficult.
And verbalising it. I don't see you, I miss you. Because that's what it is, isn't it? Yeah. I'd love to hang out with you. I can see you're busy this week and you're coming and going. Lovely, brilliant. You're going out with your mates. How about Saturday? Do you want to hang out? Do you want to have dinner with us on Saturday? And then put it in the diary. And then it's kind of, everyone can go, okay. Yeah.
So it's those sorts of stuff, the intentional conversations. If you're going to charge because you need to charge or because you think it's important, then you really need to sit down and actually think about it beforehand. Think about what you're trying to achieve, what the budgets could look like. And don't just present it to them, actually discuss it with them. Look at that salary, and also look at ways in which you can support them in setting themselves up for the rest of their life. Yeah. And, that's why I've been doing this allowance for a long time with my girls, because they're very conscious of the cost of things. They understand because they've had their own money for quite a while now. And so I'm not concerned about them living at home and not really learning some of these adult lessons, because they buy things. When we go shopping, they come with me and they buy the ingredients. And they're always saying, oh my goodness, it's so expensive. Yeah. And I go, enjoy it. Yeah. Because, at some point you'll have to pay for it yourself, but you don't have to right now.
And maybe taking a moment to think, what do I want my home to before. That sounds a bit weird,
absolutely.
but what is my home? So for me, my home, I'm quite intentional with it. It's a safe space.
Yes.
It's a safe, nourishing space. You can come and you can go. Just let me know. But it's that's what I want, and that I will prioritize that.
Yeah, I love that. I think what we subconsciously all want is a relationship with our teenagers that develops into an adult relationship where we can always enjoy seeing each other.
Yeah.
And there are family gatherings and things. And that's the intention. But the day-to-day reality sometimes doesn't end up going down that path unless we're very conscious about how we're setting that home up to be a warm, loving.
Yeah. And within that doesn't mean that anything goes.
Of course.
Like I will call out pretty much every day. But the intention is this is a safe, nourishing space.
Yeah. Love that. Well, there we are. That's the answer. So, figure it out for yourself. So you wouldn't charge your kids rent. I think if I...
Not as a teenager. No. I think later, there are some caveats, and later, and if they had like a big job and I felt they should contribute, then it's not a never thing, but as a teenager, probably not.
No, as a teenager, not for me either. And I think it would very much depend on how they related to me. If they started to, but it's not going to happen. I can't see if they were treating me like a landlord, then I might respond and say, I could be a landlord if that's what you really want. And I know that would my daughters would go, oh my goodness, I didn't mean it.
No, it's a communication thing.
Yes, because often I'll say, do you realise you're doing this? And they go, oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
So
actually, do you know what? My son, who's gone away and has to cook for himself every day, his biggest thing coming back was like, I don't have to cook for a few days. But then he was helping.
That's how I feel.
Yeah, exactly. Duh. But I noticed he was helping out more because now he understands, he understands what it means to do it. Or it comes naturally. Some of the stuff we don't actually have to teach. They feel it at some point.
Yeah. Brilliant. Great. Send us your thoughts. What would you do? What do you do? We'd love to hear your ideas. Do us a little favour. Hit the follow button on your podcast player so you don't miss a thing. Come and chat with us on social media. We're ever so friendly.
Yep, we certainly are.
Get your friends to listen because the more people who do join our club, the stronger we are as a community. Susie is involved in all sorts of other things like The Nest.
Yes.
Which is
it's a retreat. It's a local retreat place for solo women. So it's a beautiful beautiful shepherd's hut you stay in, and then you have treatment of mead, forest bathing, massage, amazing home cooked food. It's beautiful. That's a proper nourishing place.
You don't have to be solo. You could be a mother who's really struggling.
Oh, I meant it's just one person at a time. Nothing to do with your relationship
if it's all game, this is a really good present.
Yeah. No, it's just one person at a time.
Gorgeous. You can follow that on social media as well. And she does private consultations as well as going into businesses to train staff. Susie, how can people find you?
They can find me on my website, which is www.mindful-life.co.uk, and all my social media stuff has links on that.
Fantastic. That's it for now. Back again next Wednesday. See you then.
Bye-bye for now.